Welcome in to the Husker247 Podcast. And yes, that voice you are hearing for the first time in 7 weeks is me, Mike Schaefer, as I have returned. And I am joined by Michael Bruntz and Brian Christopherson, who held the fort down while I was away. And I am going to learn lots of what has been going on in my absence. And so without further ado, welcome back me and welcome in Michael Bruntz and Brian Christopherson. Gentlemen, how are you doing?
Good.
Not bad. I considered volunteering this to be a wheel episode, just to get you up to speed. But we can keep that one holstered.
Yeah, it should have just been me writing my own mailbag questions for you guys to answer, and then just putting fake, pseudonyms or aliases for all of the people asking the questions. Like that. If we had thought about it, that would have been a much better way to bring this thing back.
It's Mike S. and Lincoln, and M. Schaefer and Lincoln with another question.
Yeah. Bearded guy, Self of Van Dorn asked.
Yeah.
Bearded guy, that is a strong beard. Strong beard. Come back.
It has not been trimmed since before the child arrived, so I don't know when the next time it will be.
You could play the role, the Robert Redford gif when he was in the movie and he gives a little nod that everyone. You could play that role perfectly right now.
I would imagine I can also play the Unabomber role. Like that's sort of the.
I went with the nicer version of that.
Well, now that Robert Redford played the Unabomber, I'm just saying, like, I know what I look like right now. It's not great. So
with the golf
I know what I look like most of the time.
But. With the golf hat, you kind of do look like Happy Gilmore's caddy. You're.
Should I slip one of my slippers off here so I only have one shoe on?
Yeah, you're only wearing one shoe. Only wearing one shoe.
Well, we are almost to the Masters, which you can watch on CBS. Anyways, let's figure out what I've been missing, what's been going on. We will dive into everything Nebraska here on this podcast. We'll get a little baseball, a little recruiting here at the end, but we're going to start Nebraska football. Had an open media session last week. Michael Bruntz, Brian Christopherson in attendance. They were able to put eyes on the 2024 Nebraska Cornhuskers. And so because of that, we're going to get their thoughts on what they saw. We're going to jump back and forth, and we will start with Brian Christopherson. Give me one thought from the media availability on Thursday.
Yeah, we got it all figured out. I should probably preface it by saying, what was it, Bruntz? Like 20 to 25 minutes we were over there? And I was shooting video.
Some individual period. That's what we saw.
Yeah.
Enough for you to walk away with a very strong 9-3 win-loss record prediction.
I would say that's fair. Yeah, I would say it's fair to say I could come up with a record. But my first big thought at quick glance was the wide receivers, and I expected to love it, but I like the look of like having Banks and Nair there and just how that completes the picture, and it makes it look so much better with the just guys like who have produced before at the college level. They look the part. Will that translate to this next level? I'm pretty confident with Jamal Banks. I'm really excited about sort of the wild card aspect of Isaiah Nair, just because I think of what he was at Wyoming pre-injury, and just seeing him out on the field, I thought that looks pretty good. I'll throw one more name in, a young guy, Ja'Cory Barney, was getting kudos a couple times from Garrett McGuire in the drill that I was filming with my iPhone. So he kind of jumped out as a young guy, and we've heard enough about him mentioned, dropped by Rule, that I think it's fair to also just throw his name as a guy to at least keep an eye on this spring.
Yeah, Ja'Cory Barney, one of those guys I was really excited about because he was an early enrollee and he gets to focus on just one position for the first time in his career.
Yeah,
I think that in itself will be very, very helpful for Barney, and the wide receiver position in general probably looked and felt a little bit different than at times during the season last year. Bruntz, what do you got for us?
Yeah, I'll go offensive line. And Brian, I don't know about you, but I got very strong Bryce Benhart vibes from the way that Teddy Prohaska showed up this year for spring ball. He looks notably slimmer and kind of similar to, remember last spring where it was like you saw Bryce Benhart and you were like, did they feed him this winter? Like, what, did they just starve him for a few months? Teddy was slimmer. The fact that he was out there at all, I mean, that's significant news for him as somebody that's never been able to, really stay on the field with any kind of consistency. that was noteworthy to me. One other guy that was out there at least doing something, Turner Corcoran, who had been kind of, I mean, Matt Rule basically said whatever injury he has was going to probably drag until the fall. He was in a green jersey, but I mean, the fact that he was at least suited up, helmet on and everything going through individual period, that stood out to me as well. So the incredible shrinking Teddy was kind of one of my takeaways from the first day.
In general, just from where we've been the last couple off seasons to where things look right now, Bruntz, how do you feel about this offensive line group?
They've got a ton of options, and Matt Rule was pretty critical of Micah Mazuka in the pre-spring press conference about how he kind of needed to get up to speed on things and basically accept what the expectations are at Nebraska. He looks like a guy that started at, multiple Power 5 schools. And, if everything's right, can plug in easily there. That stood out. Both the guard spots are going to be interesting. I mean, I think right now I could probably, maybe not in Sharpie, but in pretty strong pencil, put in about 18 of Nebraska's 22 starters. But the guard spot are two where I just don't know who's going to emerge there. So I think that bears watching over these next 15 practices, kind of how that shakes out. I don't think they know either. I mean, Matt Rule kind of alluded to it, that was one spot that they're curious to watch. But a guard, I think, is going to be a really intriguing battle to watch.
Could we stop on your Micah Mazuka point real quick? Because I'm interested in your feedback, Bruntz, listening to Rule. Like it was either February or January when he made the initial comments on Mazuka and sort of challenged him publicly. And people didn't know how to take it. Like, okay, is this not working out or whatever? I kind of thought like, oh, let's wait how this plays out. Cause we've seen Rule sort of like put names out there before us through the media and then see if guys respond or they have responded. And after listening to him answer a question about Stephon Thompson and Mazuka at the last press conference this past week, I actually kind of came away more like Mazuka is like kind of, he's a football guy. Like you get him on the field, he's going to get done what you want to get done. It's the other stuff they're trying to bring him along with, so that he's ready for the pro scouts. But I guess I came away more encouraged after this. Like, yeah, he's going to be a part of this. This is just like a challenge that he's got to answer more so than like he's way off in the distances he's not going to start or something.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think there's also like, you just seeing him on the field.
Yeah.
You're like, it's hard to imagine physically that guy standing over on the sidelines for 4 quarters. You know what I mean? Like it's not like, he's this huge physically imposing guy, but I mean, he looks like what you would want a 5th or 6th year transfer to look like. Like you could easily see him sliding into that guard spot. And I agree. I mean, I thought Rule, and Rule mentioned this. I mean, he's known Micah Mazuka since he was like a young kid in Philadelphia. So I don't think that anything he said in that initial press conference was out of bounds in that relationship between the two.
Well, and BC mentioned this. I mean, last year you have the examples of guys who were suspended basically for the first spring practice, or Tommy Hill comes to mind as someone who basically they more or less challenged in a multitude of different ways and got a really strong back half of the season out of him. And he's maybe one of your more exciting players on the defensive side of the ball, where you want to see if he's able to carry over what he did last year. So I think, when he did that, I remember what that was during the post signing day press conference. I remember there was like some real, early hand wringing over it. And it just kind of feels like it's part of the Matt Rule toolbox to try to keep guys motivated and to push them in the direction that he wants them to go. You mentioned Stephon Thompson, BC. I don't know where you were going to go with your next point here, but can it include Thompson so we can learn more about what you were saying there?
Yeah. Stephon Thompson got challenged a little bit publicly too the last week. People probably read all about that. I think the promising thing with Stephon is it sounds like in the last week or two it's been trending the right way. It was more so a case of I'm going off of Rule's comments, and seeing him in person, I didn't notice that he was like way out of shape or anything. It didn't catch my eye, but he said he sort of showed up where he had to get himself, I think, fit and like ready to roll through the winter conditioning. And Rules also made the point, like all these guys, you know, you get used to doing something a certain way at another place. It's very difficult that first month or two sometimes for a guy like, okay, this is how it goes here. And maybe a guy saying, how many games did you win again last year? And this, you know, like there's a little bit of that. I'm sure that's at play sometimes. But I took it much like now I'm taking the Mazuka news from a month ago with Stephon Thompson. We've just sort of moved it ahead on the calendar where it's like, he's been challenged. Let's see where he goes the rest of the spring. But I didn't notice, I don't know if Bruntz got a good look at him. We had him in some videos. I didn't notice him being like out of shape or anything. Like I thought he fit in, and they're going to need him at that middle linebacker spot. I thought Bayer looks really impressive to me, like ready to roll in the spring. He's going to have to be a guy. John Bullock, I know Bruntz talked with after the practice. Like, it looks ready to roll. But the question is, like, who are those like 3rd through 5th guys at that middle backer spot, or 2nd through 5th guy that maybe they're starters? But Stephon Thompson, I think, needs to be one of them because that's why he was brought in here.
Yeah, I mean, that linebacker spot in general is just going to look a lot different without Luke Reimer and Nick Henrich, Bruntz.
It will. It's Thompson's interesting, though. I mean, like, if you look at what he did at Syracuse, a lot of it was as an edge. Like, he wasn't just like a every down Mike linebacker. And I agree. I mean, he's got to be part of that picture. I thought he looked fine in practices. And, you know, John Bullock kind of talked about this, that, you know, he's still new to that position. You know, Mekhi Bayer, you know, moved around to Jack and, you know, played some different spots last year. I mean, I think even though those guys are coming back and they're going to be counted on, I mean, I think they've got to, you know, win their snaps too. So Thompson's an important piece of that. I mean, I think he can be an every down backer. I think they want him to be. And I think he can also be more of a situational guy too, to kind of slot into things, because as we've seen, there's no fear in putting a guy in there in a new role and just kind of seeing how it goes.
All right, Bruntz, where else are we going? What else did you see?
Well, I mean, everybody wants to know about the quarterbacks, and they looked fine in the very limited viewing that we got. We actually got a better view of kind of how things go during pro day when Daniel Kalen and Dylan Raiola were throwing. So that was instructive too. But I guess one thing that stood out to me and kind of ties into the quarterbacks was, you know, a big reason why Nebraska brought in Glenn Thomas was they wanted Marcus Satterfield to be able to kind of roam and do different things with different groups. And you know, he was over with the tight ends, his position group. He was working with the offensive line a little bit that I saw. I think there's probably some value in there in allowing him to be able to go in different spots and coach different things versus having to be so pinned down with the quarterbacks. That was at least something I noticed early on. I mean, I don't really recall him moving around a ton last year. So, you know, that stood out. And you know, certainly, you know, the 2 freshmen, I think, are going to be right in the mix with Heinrich Haarberg. I mean, I didn't see anything in those 20 minutes that, you know, changed my thinking in any way about what that quarterback competition looks like.
BC, anything you want to add on QBs?
No, Bruntz, I mean, the part we saw was them throwing against air. And so you would hope they complete 98% of them, and they basically did. So, you know, I thought that looked fine. I like that they're doing this team within the team thing where each quarterback is sort of captain of a squad, Rattlesnake Boys, Old Gold Knights, Bug Eaters. They each got a team, I think. And, you know, I think that adds a little juice to it when, like, on Thursday, I think they did 36 third down reps each and kept track of how many they won and lost and stuff like that. And so all that's good to see. I think for the coaches, like, who can kind of command a group, you know, like who's got that extra little part that you need at that position. So that's what I'd say about that.
Okay. BC, give me your last thought that you have.
Well, this is how I would want to go out before they put me down. I think Okay, I'm gonna connect this to the NFL draft. Actually, it's gonna be a rough draft for Nebraska. Like, it's gonna be one of those where is anybody gonna get picked? Sort of deals, and people are gonna be kind of upset about it. Like, oh, this again. Thursday was the reason why. Like, chill out a little bit about it, because you look and you see Ty Robinson, you see Nash Hutmaker and Jamari Butler, and some of these guys out there. And here's a bold prediction. I think this is going to be the last draft for a little bit where Nebraska is sort of like in that, are they going to get one guy sort of situation, where it's like a real problem. I think in the 2 drafts from now, it's going to start to pick up some steam. And so be happy when you're watching like Nash and Jamari and Ty lead a drill, that those guys are not getting picked this year, and they're instead leading your team in spring football and all that. And I do buy into Rule's thoughts, which I've heard him say in multiple interviews, where he likes the look of his team on the field. Like, he just thinks they look like a good team, like athletically and all that stuff. And they do. Like, you can bounce around to the position groups and you say that's how it's supposed to look. Now, what is that going to translate to as far as the actual football part and all that? I don't know. But you look at the DBs, it's ultra competitive. Deshaun Singleton's not even out there right now, and I think he's a future pro guy. But like Bly Hill, like 6'3" guy, he's just incredibly long. Like, I mean, he's so long. Like, it's
Stanley
like,
John Baptiste-esque.
Yeah, he's got like just great length, and I think he's a guy to watch in that competition. But the DBs, it's going to be really interesting who those like other guys who rise up. We know some like 4 names, right, that are going to be starters. But then it's like, is there going to be like an Ethan Nation, a Dwight Boodle, Jeremiah Charles, Bly Hill? There's quite a bit of guys kind of elbows out for a few roles, and that's going to be really interesting. But overall, I just like the off the bus look of the team, and I think it portends well for future drafts after this one. I do think Nebraska is going to start taking a step there.
Which one of the Vikings Broncos represented here are going to be sadder during the NFL draft day?
Well, you guys have picks, right? Like, that's Denver's problem, is that
yeah, but that just means they can trade more of them for a quarterback who threw for 80 some yards against Penn State last year.
That's true. They got that.
They can just invest more into that.
Schaefer's probably just for the last month, besides doing like fatherly duties, like worked himself really up about like JJ McCarthy. Like, he probably
talked myself into Drake May, who I did not particularly care about going into the 2024 year. So just entirely because I don't want JJ McCarthy. Anyways, I digress. We'll go back to Nebraska football. Bruntz, what do you got?
So one of the 3 of us is going to have to accept JJ McCarthy in our lives, I think.
And get
hopefully
behind
it's just one of the 3.
I know. Well, not one of the. Well, I would take him over a few other options that are floating around out there. You mentioned the defensive line. Let's talk defensive line. It's striking when you compare this time this year, as we sit here on April 1, with where things were last year on April 1, right? Like, if you think about the defensive line conversation last year, it was very much like, okay, these guys are in trouble. Who's going to step up? Are they going to be able to stop the run with the 3-3-5? I mean, Purdue might run for 900 yards on Nebraska because they've only got 3 down linemen. And fast forward to now, and that group is running through a drill. And you've got Ty Robinson, who played great at the end of last season and still has a lot left to do. Nash Hutmacher, coming off of, basically a week removed from wrestling in the NCAA national championships. And, he's got to put on some weight, but he looks quick. Even guys further down the depth chart, Kai Wallen was a guy that played in the first 4 last year for Nebraska. I think he got pushed around a little bit. I don't know that he was really ready at the weight that he was at to play last season. He looks significantly better than what he was. James Williams was out there with more weight on him, still looking pretty quick. Jamari Butler led Nebraska in sacks last year. He's back. I mean, even guys like A.J. Rollins that are farther down the line, Riley Van Poppel. I mean, you just list it off one after another. You have to feel really, really good about the depth that they've built and guys that can come in and help you. Sewell Afotu, another guy coming off a redshirt year that I think is going to be in the mix as well. That group can really be the strength of that defense. And I think the secondary is in that conversation as well, like Brian said, with the number of guys they have that can help there. But it's been a long time since you would say that the defensive line is intimidating, is something that you can really build your team around. And I think this group, I feel comfortable in saying that they can kind of carry that defense early on. I think they can be really disruptive.
What I like about what you just said there, and what I think is true about almost every Matt Rule team, is that they're deep on the defensive line. Like, eventually the way it works in college, your best players leave you. You have to have something to replace them. And Nebraska will experience that next spring. And they already have guys that are lined up to go into those roles. And they're going to continue to add to that defensive line mix in this 2025 recruiting class. I felt it last year, in the summer. It felt like things had kind of turned the corner. I like the leadership out of guys like Nash and Ty. I never saw them having the year that they would have necessarily, but I thought things were turning in that direction. Listening to you sort of talk about it and putting all those names out there, I mean, they have people lined up for when Nash and Ty are no longer part of this defensive line rotation. And honestly, it probably sets up in a way that there shouldn't be too much of a drop off either, even if they have a little bit of a learning curve moving into those roles.
And Van Poppel last year, he would have played a lot more, I think, in a normal year. Like with in the small doses that you got of him, I think it was right around like 120 snaps or somewhere in that ballpark. He was kind of the extra defensive lineman when they went to a 5-man front. I think he's a potential breakout guy this year if he can get on the field. I mean, that's the question, is how much is he actually going to play? But if you're kind of doing your spring list of 5 potential breakout guys, I mean, I would probably
Hold that thought.
Oh, sorry.
I didn't tell you guys this, but one thing I was going to slip in here. I just wanted one guy from each of you that you're buying stock of based on what you saw on Thursday.
I'll go with Riley Van Poppel.
Okay, yeah. We'll just Bruntz has made his answer. I don't know if BC was sitting on that one. But anyways, if you'd like to continue on him and the defensive line in general, feel free. I just wanted to work that in there so it felt like a transition.
I think I was circling the helipad for an answer. So I'll go with Van Poppel as a potential breakout guy.
Okay. BC, do you have someone? And it doesn't have to be a young guy. I mean, it could just be someone who's coming into an opportunity or whatever it is.
Yeah. Demetrius Bell. Now that's when I say breakout, I want to be careful with that. Like, I don't think he's going to be like lead the team in receiving or anything. It's just, I'm basing it more off of what I've heard than what I've seen though. It's just a constant buzz about him that we've going back to last year when he was on the scout team, and Malcolm Hartzog, even off to the side, like mentioned him as like one of the toughest guys to cover. So, I'm buying stock in him over the long term. Sounds like he's handled his business behind the scenes pretty well. We'll see how that plays out. But as far as a young guy who's trending well, I'd say him. Defensively, I would say Bly Hill, because I just, as guys I looked at, I was like, he's a kind of a skinny guy, but he plays corner. That's fine. He's incredibly long. I mean, it just jumped out to me right away. So if he's got the other tools like they think he does, there's a reason they brought him in from the portal from St. Francis, PA. I think he could definitely be in the conversation, and there's an opening, on that side opposite Tommy Hill. I really think there's a spot for somebody that's going to jump in that we didn't see as much of last year that could start.
The Between Two Hills defense. It could be on its way. The Valley.
There you go.
That's what they're going to call it. The Valley.
Oh, that's nice. See,
print the shirts something. Now. Print the shirts.
You want to try to live between the Valley and beat Nebraska? Good luck.
Yep.
Good luck to you, sir. All right, let's take a timeout and let's take a quick pause from bad jokes, and we will come back. We'll get into a little recruiting, and we'll get into Nebraska baseball, which has numbers in front of its name for the first time in several years after a sweep of Northwestern. You're listening to the Husker247 Podcast. I'm Mike Schaefer, Brian Christopherson, Michael Bruntz, back here with you. I want to talk a little recruiting. I will be diving full bore into it now that I am diving back into all things Nebraska athletics here in the month of April. But gentlemen, there's visitors on campus, pretty much all the time now. It just seems like they've got the open door policy, and you have guys coming in, they're getting offers. You have guys that have been offered for more than a year that are stopping by. A big one, I believe, here the next couple of days, and Noah McHale, a linebacker that I know Tony White has put an emphasis on. Nebraska has put an emphasis on, coming from California, expected to be on campus as well. What else have we seen in the early days of the spring in terms of recruiting and where things set up for Nebraska as they put together, some visits here in April and beyond?
Bruntz can help me out with this, but I think Thursday was a good example of definitely a recruiting effort that is planning ahead as much as just this current class. You're seeing like 26 guys of real intrigue, like Colson Gatton, whose father actually played with Rule at Penn State. They crossed over there. And he's a interesting 26 backer out of Pittsburgh Central Catholic, or Catholic Central, where like Dan Marino and a lot of NFL guys went to, who's going to be an interesting one to watch. He's got an offer from Penn State, of course, so that it's out there, but Notre Dame and others like that, Wisconsin, he's visiting. But the fact that Rule has sort of these relationships with some of these guys, like, through his past, could make that one an interesting one. So that there's several, and then they made an offer to a kid from Iowa, who was thought it was more of a basketball prospect. I think the honest truth is there weren't a lot of profiles about him out there until he got offered. Just he looks like an athlete that his film kind of pops, and he jumps out in his traits to this staff, and they're not afraid to throw their hat in the ring right away on guys like that. So I think that's what's been interesting to me about this spring is just there's these kind of different guys who just pop up from all different classes and position groups that maybe you didn't even expect, and then suddenly they're there on Thursday.
Yeah, you had, I guess, guys that have been known targets for a while. I mean, Jack Lang stops through. He'll be back a couple times more. He's got an official visit locked in for Nebraska in June. Torrey Pittman out of Omaha Central now. He got offered by Mickey Joseph in 2022 and had his offer kind of reaffirmed by Matt Rule's staff on campus this past week. Pierce Mooberry at North, who's obviously been offered, has an official visit lined up in Nebraska and is getting some more national run. He was through this week as well. It's going to be a busy month. Glad Schaefer's back on the horn, because this is kind of the first go around where Nebraska has used the red-white game as a setting for official visits. They didn't do it last year. They opted to kind of load up in June. I think you're still going to see the big June visit weekends. We've already got a lot of those confirmed for the middle of the month, but a lot of what I would say are probably top of the board or close to it targets are going to be at Nebraska in late April for official visits. So it's an opportunity to really kind of get the class even, they've got a few commits they've had for a while, but this is going to be the month where I think you're going to see a lot of those top targets, potentially going in Nebraska's way.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because it has been really interesting seeing how they've approached, whether it was this staff last year or the previous staff, how they've approached sort of the month of April when, you can use these official visits. And we've seen other schools sort of load up in April and May, and Nebraska largely has not done that. And so I am curious if there's a rationale for it, or if it's simply there's probably no better example of Nebraska fans' commitment to the team than the spring game, and what that's, and especially this year with Dylan Raiola out there. I would anticipate it's going to be quite the atmosphere. And so, if you get good weather, those spring games are some really big recruiting environments, and it makes a lot of sense to me to try to capitalize on that and make that a even bigger recruiting weekend by having official visitors in. I am a little surprised, guys. Not a single commitment in this time period of which I was away. You know, the running joke of whenever I've taken vacations, expect at least one, if not two. Kind of came to this was far from a vacation, we'll put it that way. But you know, it kind of came to an end here. Are you a little surprised that Nebraska sits at, I think, just 4 commitments right now, as we are in the month of April moving forward? Now they get these in a flurry. We've seen that, and I don't think that there's a long-term concern here. I'm a little bit surprised that they don't have more guys already kind of in the boat at this point, particularly with as many in-state offers as they have out.
You lost your fastball. That's what I learned. You don't have the vacation magic anymore.
Yeah. Well, that's okay. I'm all right with that.
It's not particularly surprising to me, if only because if you look at what Nebraska did in March, it was pretty quiet for visitors. Like you didn't have, I mean, Matt Rule was in, Scotland for part of that, taking a little vacation. I think they kind of used the month to focus much more on off-season stuff, guys already on the roster, because it was just it was quieter than most Marches have been. And even if you go back to January, I mean, they had the big visit junior day, but didn't really have a lot of guys coming through. That's why I think April's going to be a lot busier in terms of just, guys visiting, potential commitments, that sort of thing. So, and it's interesting too. I mean, you mentioned kind of the local guys. A lot of the local guys that Nebraska's offered have offers elsewhere, and they're kind of going through those options as well. So I think that's part of it, is that, I think people nationally are kind of waking up a little bit to what the talent is in Nebraska. And I think guys are, maybe kind of going through the process a little bit more than maybe what they would have been the last few years.
Yeah, it feels like most of the guys we've interviewed that have popped through are like in the midst of like, maybe Nebraska's like their third of like 5 visits or something.
Yeah.
So I think after some of these play out, you're going to see either guys make decisions or those lists, dwindle down a little bit more, where it's focused on like 2 or 3. So that's a big part of it. I do think, we'd be remiss if we didn't say April's going to be fascinating, maybe on the quarterback front. You've got like TJ Lateef, who's been out there as a strong Husker target, but then we've had reports about, Madden, Imalieva, also being an option. And Bruntz, you wrote about another yesterday that's popping in, right?
Yeah, they've got a 25 quarterback, Mason Drube, from Campbell County, Wyoming. That's near Sheridan, for those of you who are really getting your maps out and your atlases out. Doesn't have an offer. He's an Oregon State offer, Michigan State. He's at least on Nebraska's radar. He's coached there by Ora Garst, who used to be on Nebraska's staff. On the creative side.
What a wild connection.
Yeah. Well, Ora had been an assistant coach prior to coming to Nebraska in an off the field role. So, interesting little connection there. But he'll be through on Tuesday. So, my feel is that Lateef is very high up Nebraska's list, and I think that's probably mutual as well right now.
Yep.
All right. Do we want to switch over a little bit to basketball recruiting before we jump to baseball?
Yeah, we could.
You want to toss in there? We don't have to spend a lot of time on it, but obviously there's a lot of balls in the air as it relates to Nebraska basketball and the portal right now.
I want to know every player that Nebraska basketball has made contact with in the last 2 weeks. Everyone.
I don't think we have enough time for that.
Yeah, a lot of them. That's become the new reporting thing, which is fine. But Bruntz and I sometimes get a kick out of over the last few weeks. We'll have sent each other a message like, "Oh, here's a guy who's been contacted by 55 schools. Like, try to make something out of that." But
where do they fall on the list? Oh, they're the number 2 team. Oh, they're 52.
Yeah. But it's fine. I mean, there's a cottage industry for everything now. So William Kyle is in town today. The local kid who played at South Dakota State. Great defender. Maybe a little bit of Josiah Alec in him. I think he can be one of those guys who's a kind of a live wire and definitely an interesting target for Nebraska. They hosted Frankie Fiddler, William Kyle's former teammate at Bell West on Thursday. Frankie Fiddler, then we know, was like going up to Wisconsin for the weekend where his former teammate Chucky Hepburn plays. So those are local guys of interest. Aside from that, though, I think Schaefer, we could at least just mention this. Like there's probably a little bit of worry by fans. I know people are getting used to this portal age, but it's still like disconcerting when you see like 4 or 5 guys like go in right away after a team just made it to March Madness for the first time in 10 years. I think we're both of the mind that nothing stunned Nebraska that's been done by people who have gone in the portal, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I definitely think Nebraska was prepared for everyone that went into the portal here on their end of things in the last couple weeks after the season ended, including CJ Wilcher, because I can say with certainty they've had meetings about, just general ideas of who was going to do what before the season ended. You have to, you don't have that kind of runway where you would in the past, where you have those exit meetings. I remember, Coach Sadler talking about that, and Miles and everyone else, because the portal is just all present everywhere, and guys want to get going, and they want, to make decisions earlier. They want to get in on their visits or whatever it is that they want to do. And so I think you want all sides to have a general indication as to what the idea is. And with that comes NIL. And I think Nebraska has a better handle for what they're doing NIL-wise going into the 24-25 season than maybe where they were even at going into 23-24, where they ended up with, a few players in Bryce Williams and Rink Mass that have really kind of changed the trajectory of things. And those guys cashed in. I think they're going to have better NIL opportunities at Nebraska because of what they did in this previous year in 23-24. And so I think the roster where it's at right now is where Fred Hoiberg and the brains of how they're building things over there would have expected it to be 2 weeks ago. And so because of that, now it's time for Nebraska to take the next step forward. And that's to go out and procure the talent that they want. And I think they have a good indication of how they want to build too. And I think William Kyle is a big piece of that, not necessarily because of anything he might do on the offensive end, though I think you might see a fair amount of dunks if Nebraska, whoever ends up with William Kyle. I think they need a rim protector. I think they need a complementary piece to Rink Mass who can spread you out, but isn't necessarily going to be the guy who can prevent teams from driving at will. And so Josiah Alec wasn't necessarily that guy either. William Kyle can be, with sort of his explosive athleticism. And I think that he would fit nicely in that Josiah Alec role. And I think he's a pretty important piece that Nebraska would love to add. And he's not the only one. I mean, they're looking at other big men in that regard too. But yeah.
The nucleus is there. If you can keep, I'd call it a big 4. I would include Jamarcus Lawrence in there with Jawan Gary, Bryce Williams, and Rink Mass, who all, Rink, Bryce, and Jawan all have one more year of eligibility before them. After the game in Memphis, after the loss, of course, things are very raw, but they do get asked that question, and everybody kind of kept it close to the vest. But as Nebraska does have a good NIL situation, and you'd hope you could keep those guys along. And then you sort of say, how do we complement this? They're in a better spot to me than a year ago in the offseason, as far as just like what your base, what you're building outside of from. And so you're hoping they can do that. This is just the way it is in college basketball now. It's just there's going to be a free agent market every year, and you're going to have to go back and find like 4 or 5 different pieces that sort of fit in. And hopefully you've got 2 or 3 at least returning from last year, where kind of what they're about. So Nebraska's still in a good spot unless some other bomb drops, because I don't think one has dropped yet. I don't think that's happened with the stuff. Eli Rice maybe surprised some people, because he had a productive first year, but those type of things guys are going to come and go now. It's just the way it is.
Yeah. And I mean, some of it is guys are just going to look for more NIL opportunity elsewhere. That's the reality of the beast. And you don't have, you don't have an unlimited amount of resources. And so you don't necessarily chase anybody off, but if they don't fit into what your team build is from a resource standpoint, you can only make so many decisions. One name to Ulis, the point guard, that'll be an interesting thing to follow as well. I mean, I think the indication seemed to be that he will be back with Nebraska next year, and he invested time, and they invested time during the season in which he couldn't play. So he sort of gives them a look that they haven't had in a while with an actual point guard. So that in itself is kind of an interesting piece in all of this too.
Yeah, Fred was very complimentary whenever Ulis popped up about how he just fit in and he was a good teammate. And the last time we asked about Ulis, he spoke about him being part of next year's roster. That's the last we have him on the record about that. So definitely good to throw his name in there too.
Yep. All right. Well, let's finish up with some Nebraska baseball, who are on an just outstanding heater at the moment. Michael Bruntz, Nebraska has some numbers in front of their name here as we hit the month of April. I believe I sent you a text towards middle to late February stating that I would not overthink what Nebraska baseball is until we got to April. You sent me a response to that maybe a week after returning to that text saying, yeah, they're going to be good. You might as well just get on board now. Turns out you were right. They had a very nice month of March. Where do things set up for them as they get into conference play?
Yeah, it's so they're ranked 22nd by Baseball America, 24th by D1 Baseball this morning. They have won 10 in a row. They sit at 20-5. They swept Northwestern and generally like, okay, big deal. It's Northwestern. They had to work on Sunday. They won it in extra innings after they gave up a 2-run lead in the 8th inning. But that this is a team, I think that, at the start of the year, I think we were talking about kind of what the prognosis was. And I think I said something like that. There's volatility with what they can be and what their ceiling is. And they've found ways to win, which good teams do. I think they've got, I think the bullpen depth, improved bullpen depth that they thought they had has shown itself. And, I think they've got a decent starting 3 right now on the weekend in Brett Sears, Drew Christo, and now Mason McConaughey. And, I think when you kind of look at what's in the Big Ten right now, landscape-wise, I mean, Iowa, was ranked to start the year. They've struggled a bit. Maryland has kind of struggled a bit as well. And, Nebraska's just kind of taking care of its business. They scheduled hard, or at least somewhat difficult in February. They won a lot of those games, which helped significantly when you start looking at RPI. We're probably maybe a week or so away from really hanging on to the RPI stuff. But if you kind of look at what Warren Nolan is projecting for Nebraska, he's projecting a 40-win season right now for this team. And if you're talking a 40 to 42 win season, you've probably taken care of business against the teams that matter on your schedule that are left. And Nebraska has some of those. I mean, Creighton on the road is a big one on Tuesday. You're going to be on the fringe hosting conversation and certainly in an NCAA regional conversation. So they're in a really good place. So they just got to keep it rolling. That's basically where they're at right now.
What would have to happen for them to host a regional? I know that's the most absurd question to ask when they haven't been this good in a while, but Nebraska hasn't hosted a regional since 2008. Their best teams in recent years were 2021. I think they were the 2 seed in that. And then they were the 2 seed in Stillwater in 2019. Where would they have to get to like 45 wins at this point? Or is it the Big Ten prevents this from even being a real conversation for them as a potential regional host?
The Big Ten makes it really tough.
I think it's a down year for the conference, right?
There's a lot of teams that are there's a really big middle to the conference right now. Like most years, I would say a lot of these teams would probably be like a 3 to 5. And I think I said at the beginning of the year that when they kind of projected where teams were going to finish, I think Iowa and Indiana were 1-2. Nebraska was picked 5th. I think there were a lot of teams that were like 3 to about 8 that you could jumble up and probably feel okay about the way that they came out. Nebraska is going to have to basically fight the Big Ten anchor that it's going to be dragging around all year. I mean, the conference is okay, but not great. And, I think if they get to, let's say, 42 wins, which would be just an incredible run, that's probably what it's going to take to be in that conversation. Like, if you're not going to play elite teams week in and week out, there's little margin for error. You have to beat everybody. And, when we've seen teams from the Big Ten host, and it has happened, since Nebraska's been in the league, it's been teams that have basically run the table for the most part. And you probably got to win the regular season. You probably have to get close to winning the tournament. And, you're still probably going to be a fringe host team, which just sucks, but that's just the way it is. And, I think the one thing that you can say for this group is that they've got enough depth in the pitching staff and at the plate too, to be able to, really kind of mix and match and win tough games. And, as much as we talk about, what Fred Hoiberg's team is going to look like next season and how that roster rebuild goes, I think Will Bolt and his staff deserve a hell of a lot of credit for the way that they rebuilt the roster from last season to this year. I mean, the bullpen depth they've added has been pretty incredible. You've been getting really strong performances from guys like Kyle Perry, who has had a really kind of rough career at Nebraska with arm injuries and just, kind of mixed roles and things like that. That's all been really impressive. The JUCO guys they've added have been really good. So I think they've done a nice job of building a team that's, kind of built to go somewhere when it comes to the postseason.
Yeah, it feels like Kyle Perry was on that 2008 team that last hosted a regional.
I believe so. He might have been a freshman on that 05 team that played at Rosenblatt. I don't know. Yeah.
So it's just finishing things out here. All right. Well, we're definitely going to be keeping an eye on Nebraska baseball as they march towards completing a big season and a big year for Will Bolt. Nebraska athletics era looks up. We didn't even talk about the fact there's a new athletic director in town since the last time that I was on one of these. Maybe we'll do that later. Anything else you guys want to add as we conclude here for today's episode?
Welcome back. Good to have you back in the saddle.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's good to see you. You got some baby spit up maybe on your left shoulder, I think, but you did it was a nice return.
The thing that no one told, there's lots of things that no one told me, but one of them, your sense of smell is just like, all I can smell is just like baby smell, formula smell, and poop. Like, that's all it is. That's all the house smells like. No one warned me that you were going to just have to wear like slippers or moccasins the entire time because your feet will hurt from walking around. Like, we have some hardwood floors and it's not all carpet. There was that. There's lots of things people did warn me about, but just simple stuff that if there's any potential parents out there, invest in some good footwear. You will not be upset that you did. I'll put it that way.
Yeah. And if you'd like me to get you a Viking onesie, like we got the baby, I'll see what sizes they have.
Yeah, we're hoping that he still fits in those by the time we get to the draft here, so he can be wearing that when JJ McCarthy gets selected after they trade 7 first-round picks to move up to number 4. That'll be great. So he can. I real quickly, I have no intention of making my child root for any of the teams that I root for. Like, I very much, he might wear some clothes for photos, but at some point he will have to pick his own sports depression, much like I did in the 90s. And so I just want to say I'm not abusing him by making him a Vikings fan. He can make that decision on his own. I just want to put that out there for those that are concerned. So
he's going to be a Packers fan.
Just because you said that. Don't say that. Don't say that. There's certain teams that we will push very hardly against, but not too hard to. I don't want to egg them into I can antagonize Dad by doing this. So, but I don't put that out there, Bruntz. That was mean.
Sorry.
Mean. All right. Well, we will be back with more podcast content. There, of course, will be plenty of content at Husker247.com as the spring football season rolls along. Baseball is happening. Basketball transfer portal is hot. So we have all the content for you at Husker247. I am Mike Schaefer, and I am back. Brian Christopherson, Michael Bruntz never left you, and all of their great work can be found there at Husker247 as well. We'll catch you next time.